Django Reinhardt was an innovator, and what great innovators do is they fuse influences, and that's exactly what he did. He fused Dixieland, French traditional music, swing jazz, and gypsy music into this thing we now call gypsy jazz. He was a pioneer, being able to bring influences together and make them work. The key thing that made what he did different to what was happening in America was in America, jazz was all about piano and wind instruments. Django starred the guitar.
Listen to Django Reinhardt. It's the same melody, but what a difference in interpretation. These three musicians will represent two guitars and a bass fiddle. Finally, here is Stephane Grappelli, virtuoso violinist of hot jazz. From the magic strings of the instruments of these five musicians was formed the Quintet of the Hot Club of France.
That was Jazz Hot, one of the very few examples on film of Django Reinhardt in performance. It's a great shame that we don't have more footage, but what we do have is a huge volume of recorded music. It's very easy to understand from the clip we've just seen how Django Reinhardt has become celebrated as one of the greatest guitarists of all time, and certainly one of the greatest jazz guitarists of all time. His story is an incredible tale of personal adversity, social adversity. Django Reinhardt was born in Belgium. He was a gypsy and moved to Paris on the outside, where he actually lived in a gypsy caravan in an area called La Zone. There was a great deal of prejudice, obviously, against the gypsies in Paris, and all his life he had to fight against adversity. He was practically illiterate because there was no schooling available for him. But he had a great love for music. He played guitar alongside accordionists. By the age of 15, he and his brother were busking in cafes all around Paris and eking out a living doing that. But he was an exceptional musician.
Django Reinhardt gathered an eclectic range of influences, fused them in a way that made it work. Eclectic can just be another word for a big mess. He made eclectic work.
Django Reinhardt began his career as a banjo player, but it was a 6-string banjo, so it was a banjo guitar really. And that's where he learned his rudiments of music. He could never read music, although later on in life he created a symphony by playing the guitar to someone who would transcribe it for him. But he had such a gift, such an ability for music, that it wasn't really a barrier to him. So he could play with a big orchestra like Ellington's band, and he would always be at the forefront.
Jazz is inherently risky. You think about most music. Beautiful music, Mozart, composed, rehearsed, perfect. Rock music, rehearsed. Everyone knows what they're going to do. Might vary a bit, but no, jazz is risky. Jazz is like sport. A group of musicians go onto the field hoping that they will pull it off. Jazz musicians go out there with true faith. They are like Picasso painting live and hoping he's going to produce the picture in 2 hours.
The evolution of jazz. This orchestra would be horrified at the thought of changing a single note or of suppressing the slightest sigh in this Largo of Handel. Respect of the written notes is one of the essential conditions of all classical interpretations, but not so with jazz. If we say, I have just heard Handel's Largo, we also say, I have just heard a record by Armstrong, by Coleman Hawkins, by Jack Teagarden, or by Benny Goodman. Why this difference? In jazz music, the execution is more important than the composition. How it is played is what counts, not how it is written. The melodic theme serves as a bare background for the intricate variations of the hot jazz player, and the value of the piece depends on the quality of the interpretation. Until about 1926, jazz music was played straight. That is, the melodic theme was more or less respected and each air was played as written, such as, for instance, this one. Then jazz, little by little, lost its coldness, and straight jazz became hot, thanks to a few musicians whose remarkable improvisations gave jazz a new lease on life.
It's hard to express how difficult it must have been, with only 2 fingers, to be able to play the guitar at all. But to take that skill to the level that he did is unbelievable. His job in the quintet was to provide the lead line. He would be playing the solos while the other guitarists hammered out that steady rhythm that's become world famous. It's infectious, it's catchy, and it's music with a smile on its face. It brings you joy. Whenever you switch a record on of Django Reinhardt, there's a positivity, there's a joy, there's sheer pleasure in there that makes it so listenable. That's why in the 21st century, we still enjoy hearing the music of Django Reinhardt. That's why we still buy his records, because he is a true genius of jazz and a true genius of music.
One of his defining characteristics has to be his determination. He was born dirt poor. He was born a gypsy. And gypsies were beyond the lowest of the low. And yet, early on, he found himself playing banjo. He found himself playing violin.
However, tragedy struck when a fire broke out in the caravan he shared with his wife. And Django Reinhardt was severely burned. He lost the use of 2 of the fingers on his left hand, which was a great tragedy for a musician who specialised in the guitar. He also almost lost the use of his leg. The hospital where he was taken, suffering from his terrible burns, wanted to amputate his leg. But Django refused to do that, and eventually he was able to walk with the aid of a cane. So his personal life is a great battle against adversity. Django Reinhardt wasn't going to be defeated by his physical problems. He took up the guitar again. He was such a genius that he was able to develop a style of his own using only the 2 fingers of his left hand on the fret. If we didn't have the footage, it would be remarkable. No one would believe you that you could deliver jazz guitar of this quality with a severe disability like that. But Django Reinhardt managed to do that. We get these amazing solos.
In 1931, he met Stephane Grappelli, an extraordinarily talented jazz violinist. And in many ways, they were opposites. Stephane was urbane, educated. He'd been through polite society. Django, the very opposite. And yet, they gelled.
Django était un dieu pour un musicien. Les musiciens croyaient en lui et lorsqu'ils se jouaient avec lui, il pouvait jouer ce qu'il voulait avec le plus de facilité de cœur et de facilité possible.
Mais pourquoi?
Pourquoi? Parce que c'était Django. Tout est
Oui,
là.
mais je veux dire, pourquoi? Je suppose qu'il avait quand même, je ne dirais pas un don, il
C'est-à-dire
avait...
Django était tellement fort au point de vue harmoniste qu'il soutenait les gens comme un bouchon sur l'eau.
Et je crois que c'était en même temps et un compositeur et surtout, comment dirais-je, il pensait orchestre, quand il t'accompagnait.
Exactement.
Et tu avais l'impression d'avoir un orchestre derrière toi et je crois que tu n'as jamais si bien
Non
joué
seulement j'avais l'impression,
pendant longtemps.
J'avais un orchestre, mais une philharmonique. Django était tout un orchestre.
Bon, alors, Django n'est plus là, mais tu nous restes et je te laisse la place car les paroles c'est très bien, mais la musique c'est encore mieux.
Et si tu me permets, nous allons jouer quelques de ses compositions.
Mais je l'espère.
Together, they formed the Quintet of the Hot Club de France. This was a remarkable quintet because if you look at any jazz ensemble, we see there are horns, there are drums, there's often a piano. But the Quintet of the Hot Club de France was entirely based on stringed instruments. We had 3 guitar, we had the violin of Stephane Grappelli, and we had the bass. It's a unique arrangement of instruments. The Quintet of the Hot Club de France were playing what became dismissively known in many respects as gypsy music. It was almost ghettoized. It became a unique genre in its own right. The guitars are used rather than strictly as instrumental lead instruments. They become rhythm instruments. This is the first time we really hear guitars used almost exclusively, two of them for rhythm, and we have these amazing Django Reinhardt solos over the top. In 1938, Django Reinhardt and the Quintet du Hot Club de France toured the UK to enormous success. They became overnight hugely successful. However, tragedy was just round the corner. The Second World War broke out and France quickly fell to the Nazi regime. Stephane Grappelli decided to remain home in safety in the UK, whereas Django returned to France. It's hard to express just how dangerous that decision was. We all know from history and from the media about the Holocaust that befell the Jewish people. But the other victims, of course, were trade unionists, homosexuals, and the Romani population. The gypsies had to wear a brown triangle that signified who they were. And it's estimated that half of the Romani population died in concentration camps. So socially, he was on the run. He was a target, or likely to be killed or sent to a concentration camp. But what actually worked in his favour was the fact that Paris was a city where Nazi officers would come to relax and to enjoy the Parisian lifestyle. For that reason, Django Reinhardt was tolerated. He did many precautions. If he was going to perform American music, for example, he would give it a French title in order to disguise the fact that here was this genre which the Nazis hated so much. But he lived a charmed life. But the adversity that the man had to overcome is absolutely astonishing. Not only did he have to work hard to overcome his disfigured hand, he was in a persecuted minority and would always have to be looking over his shoulder. So the wartime period is remarkable. He twice tried to escape from France, but failed to do that. Probably the most famous composition created by Django Reinhardt is Nuage. This was the song that the Parisians adopted during the Nazi occupation to help get through that horrible time. And when he performed this live, sometimes the crowd would demand that he played it over and over again. So it very much became the theme tune for Nazi occupation. And here again, we see Django Reinhardt having to overcome his adversity. After the war, we see a change in Django Reinhardt. He was invited to go to America and tour with Duke Ellington, which he did. And at this point, he moves from acoustic guitar into electric guitar. Now, the electric period of Django Reinhardt isn't respected nearly as much as the acoustic period, but if we do listen to the electric sound of Django Reinhardt, his virtuosity is astonishing, and I think it deserves much more appreciation and much more consideration than it actually gets. Unfortunately, things didn't work out for him in America and he returned to France. Tragically, in 1953, his life was cut short. Django Reinhardt died of a brain hemorrhage at the age of 43. For us, we're fortunate because he made many, many recordings from the 20s through to the time of his death. And by listening to these recordings, we begin to understand just why this man is known to have influenced not only every guitarist, but every rock and roll guitarist that follows him. The Quintet du Hot Club de France is very unusual because here we have stringed instruments, and in a way it's a precursor to the rock and roll sound. We've got two rhythm guitarists. So people like Wishbone Ash and Thin Lizzy, the Allman Brothers famously, they all stand on the back of the Quintet du Hot Club de France, who pioneered the idea of a rhythm guitarist. So if you go to see AC/DC, for example, the roots are here, and they began in 1934 in Paris.
And his influence was extraordinary in the way that his music was eclectic. He influenced country rock, he influenced blues, he influenced modern rock, and he even influenced heavy metal. What other guitarist can claim that? Without Django, well, we might not have Willie Nelson, arguably one of the best country blues guitarists of all time, who said of Django that Django was the best guitarist of all time. Reinhardt even influenced classical music. Julian Bream, CBE, is the man who arguably made the guitar respectable as a classical instrument. His influence? None other than Django Reinhardt. The strange thing is that the very first music that Julian Bream heard was Django Reinhardt. Django inspired B.B. King. B.B. King's friend brought him a whole load of records, including Django Reinhardt. Now let's be honest and be clear, B.B. King was king of the blues. And he said that Django Reinhardt's playing was just so much clearer than he could play.
Django Reinhardt made a contribution to the world of heavy metal. One of the early films that I made in my career was to interview Tony Iommi of Black Sabbath. And Tony Iommi tells the story of how he lost two of his fingers in an industrial accident. But his foreman played him the record of Django Reinhardt and managed to persuade Tony Iommi to continue as a guitarist. So not only did Django Reinhardt influence the jazz world, he was also instrumental in creating one of the most famous groups in the heavy metal world, Black Sabbath. This is what Tony told me when I asked him how he had been able to overcome the adversity of losing two fingers.
Yeah, I had an accident many years ago. As you can see here, where you want it there, that finger and that finger, where I used to do sheet metal work. What happened one day, the day I was leaving, funny enough, from the job to turn professional, the old turn professional one, and I was doing pressing this piece of metal that I used to have to weld afterwards, and the press just came straight down on me, and of course, as you pull it back, I pulled the ends of the fingers off, and at the time I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe what I'd done. So I thought that was it. I was never play again. And what happened was a friend of mine brought me a record. It was the first time I was introduced to Django Reinhardt, who had also got, damaged two fingers and played with two fingers. And he got me back into playing, and I suppose it was 6 or 7 months later. And I started trying to play with these two fingers, like that. So these were bandaged up, and I was playing with these two, which got me to use the little finger as opposed to that finger. And then, of course, I went to try and find to the hospital, try and find some kind of tip made so that I could put on, because, of course, if I play here, the string would just rip the skin off because the bone's right underneath. And they said, oh, there's nothing can be done, you'll have to pack up playing and whatever. So I went back home and I got a squeezy bottle and melted it down, made it into a ball, got a hot soldering iron and made a sort of hole in it, and got it down to fit my finger. So I got this big ball on the end of my finger. Then I sat there all night, filing it down with some sandpaper to make a shape of a thimble. Then I put some leather on it because it wouldn't grip otherwise. It was plastic, it'd just slip off the string. I put some leather on, which made something like this, which is a plastic and then leather on it. And I used that and off I went.
Django was really the founder of modern jazz guitar. You could argue that crown would go to Eddie Lang or Charlie Christian, but if you actually look at the range of people who cite Django as the best guitarist in the world, the pop opinion is he is the best guitarist that has ever lived.
Django Reinhardt was a master of both his own compositions and the jazz standards. We tend to think of Django Reinhardt through the prism of Stephane Grappelli's amazing violin, but he was very comfortable playing with horn players, in larger groups, and with clarinetists. He wasn't restricted in any way. The fact that he couldn't read music really wasn't a barrier to Django Reinhardt. He was such a genius that he brought his own unique style to every performance that he gave, either in the recording studio or in the concert hall.
Bonjour Babik. Bonjour Mitsu. Bonjour Ninine. Ah, je pense bien que ça va. Alors, tu viens de nous jouer quelque chose de terrible là,
Oui.
avec Babik,
Oui.
le fils à Django,
Oui.
et puis Mitsu, ton grand-fils.
Oui.
Ah, ça me fait plaisir d'être avec vous, les manouches là.
Oui.
Django, c'était un manouche.
Un manouche, oui.
Tu es parent avec Django, je crois.
Cousin Germain, oui.
Cousin Germain.
Oui.
Et tout à l'heure, alors, tu vas jouer avec ton autre fils,
Oui.
Loulou.
Oui.
Quel âge ça lui fait, Loulou?
9 ans. Il va
Quoi
avoir 10 ans, 10 ans.
Oh là, mais c'est toi qui lui as appris la guitare?
Non, pas du tout.
Mais qu'est-ce qu'il lui a appris alors?
Tout seul, il t'a appris.
Tout seul?
Tout seul, oui.
Mais il paraît qu'il est terrible. Tous les musiciens disent qu'il est terrible. C'est vrai?
Oh non.
Dis donc, ça rappelle le bon temps avec
Ah
Django
oui.
quand même. Hein? C'était un vrai manouche, Django. Hein?
C'était le vrai, lui.
C'est vrai. Un peu comme les gitans, quoi.
Oui, oui.
Qu'est-ce qu'il aimait bien dans la vie, Django?
Ben, c'était la pêche qu'il aimait bien.
Dans la musique, la pêche?
Oui, la pêche, oui.
Et quoi encore?
Et le billard.
Le billard?
Ah oui.
Il paraît qu'il était fort au billard.
Très fort, oui.
Il paraît qu'il était très adroit même à tous ces jeux d'adresse. Il y
À
avait
tous
des...
les jeux de main, il était à droite.
C'est ça, c'est ça. Il y avait des choses, tu sais, pour prendre des appareils photographiques,
Oui,
une
oui.
espèce de grue
De
dans les
oui,
cafés.
oui, oui.
Il paraît qu'il
Ouais, il enlevait
raflait
tout.
tout. Ah oui, quel type formidable
Ah oui.
c'était, dis donc. Et alors, tu as joué avec lui tout à fait au début du Quintet du Hot
Presque au
Club de
début,
France.
oui. Presque au début.
Ah bon. Et tu te souviens, qu'est-ce que vous jouiez beaucoup comme thème?
Ben, Django Logie,
C'est ça.
Minor Swing, presque tous les trucs qui jouent en ce moment. Là.
C'est ça. Oui. Alors, tu es heureux là?
Oui,
Tu es content?
oui,
Tu vas à la
très
pêche
content.
aussi, toi?
Oui, de temps en temps.
Et tu joues au billard aussi?
Un peu, oui.
Un petit peu?
Oui, oui.
Bon, alors tu vas encore nous jouer quelque chose avec Loulou, hein?
Avec le loup, oui.
Il paraît qu'il est fantastique.
Oui, il se défend.